Okay, criminal damage because they put paint on the motorway bridge. Nobody doubted that. But they were charged with support for a terrorist organization. Because they supported the aims of the Red Army faction, which was that they were put together in large groups. And they didn't do it out of humanitarian motives, but the prosecutor thought, and therefore they had to be charged with that particular crime. The problem with terrorism is that it gets extended. Organized crime, same thing. Serious crime, same thing. What is serious crime? What is organized crime? More than two? What is international crime? Very easy to stretch this. The next thing is, once you have these things on the statute book for those crimes, they will be extended to other crimes. This goes back as far as the Inquisition. I had a marvelous book which I lent to a student and have therefore lost. It's called The History of Torture. Very good book. By a chap called Rutgen. Malvice Rutgen. And he describes in it how torture crept into the criminal justice system in the late Middle Ages. We all seem to think that criminal justice in the Middle Ages was all terrible, everybody was tortured until they confessed. In fact, that's not true. I've been to Croatia a lot of times now. We've been looking, incidentally, while I was there were some seminars on 11th, 12th century laws. They're very restricted in their use of torture. Very restricted. You couldn't use torture, you could only use a very limited amount of torture, dependent on the seriousness of the crime, dependent on the amount of witnesses. There were a lot of restrictions. Yeah? Still barbaric, but it was much more restricted than we thought it was. Then the Inquisition came and said, well, we've got heretics, they are so bad, we can't have all these silly little restrictions. Let's break the rules open a little bit. And that's exactly what they did. The Jesuits, actually, breaking open. They're also the great fighters against torture later on. But in the beginning, they were the ones that broke open the rules and said, this is not new torture, it's a continuation of the one that was authorized yesterday. So we can keep on doing it. And as Langbine said, I forgot the exact quote, but there is a historical law that whenever measures are introduced into the criminal justice system to deal with out cases that are beyond the pale, once they're accepted for these terrible cases, they will creep into the general system. And I have always held that rule up and noticed it whenever I've worked in the human rights field. You cannot introduce measures against terrorism that will not seep into the general criminal law. And this is typically what happens. So the drivers are, there is more data, it's encouraged from Europe. The joint government and ID card system is encouraged, and the fight against terrorism is encouraged. Right, now let's go to the problems. Right? This is one of the first problems. What is done with these data? It's not just a matter of saying, let's look at all 25 to 35-year-old people of Pakistani background who have travelled to Pakistan the last 2 or 3 years and who have attended a particular mosque. It's a kind of rough profile that you might sort of say is halfway sensible. It isn't really, but you might think is halfway sensible in trying to filter out the limited number of possible suspects from a large population. That is not how it's done. And interestingly enough, again I can draw on a bit of experience in a totally different field, and that is in direct marketing. Direct marketing has always, long gone, so for the last 20 years, extensive data mining and scoring. And I don't know if you know these words, but it means getting a lot of aggregate data and a lot of data on a particular person, analyzing it, coming up with an algorithm, a number, right? And applying that number to an individual. So I might feed in where somebody lives, how rich that area is, or how poor that area is, what age the person has, whether he's married or not married, what kind of qualifications, what kind of food or drink I know he's been eating for the last... We put a lot of this when he goes on holidays, all kind of stuff. Yeah? I put that against the general database, and now somebody comes to you and says, I want to sell lawnmowers. Okay? You can come up with an algorithm of somebody who's more likely than other people to buy a lawnmower. So if you do a mail shot, and you send people a mailing, yeah, what the chap who owns the data mine will tell you is that if you use his list, you're going to get a better response than if you just do it randomly, or if you just took everybody who has a card. Yeah? And you can measure this. You can send out a mailing just to a random selection of people. You send out 1,000 mail shots, and 5 people will buy a lawnmower. Now you go to your data mining chap, and he gives you a list of 1,000 people, and you send the same mail shot, and 15 people come back and buy a lawnmower. That's good. Okay? That's how direct marketing works in very simple terms. And you can see how the eyes of the police and the intelligence services start to water when they think of this marvelous system for weeding out possible targets. Okay? It started, again, Germany leads in some ways with the Rastafari in the 70s and 80s, where they tried to do the same sort of thing. You take a large group of people and you select and select and select more. It used to be relatively crude, like a particular age group, whether they drive a particular car. The Red Army faction, for some strange reason, was always very much into very top quality cars. Whenever they used cars, it was top quality cars. And whenever you see an old Trabant, you could let it go past that, will not have a terrorist there. But whenever the next big Merc comes past, stop with a 25-year-old in it. That was the basis of the very old Rastafari. Just like with the data mining chap, the criminal intelligence and the national security agencies are beginning to be more clever. I think they're more clever. They collect more and more and more and more, more data, and they are more and more sophisticated in their analysis. And this is the next thing. I described it in some detail in a report a couple of years ago on the total information awareness system in the United States, which is a defense, what do you call it? The defense ministry, no, the defense agency. American Defense Agency sponsored project, which is officially stopped but really still goes on, in which they said, let's get all the data, and that our computers are so clever, they will be able to identify patterns where individual analysts can't identify them. Right? So we take the information from all of you, let the computer do its work, and the computer will come out with 5 people here and say they are significantly more likely to be a terrorist than somebody else. The problem with this is that you can't do anything against it. Yeah? If I get arrested by a biased policeman, says, you come with me, right? I say, why? He says, well, you're between 20 and 25-year-old, you're black and a woman, and that's my target. And I don't like blacks and women, and I'm therefore arresting you, right? I can do something about it. I can complain to the man's boss, and I said he's a biased bigot. Second, if you get arrested because the computer says you have a score of more than 87, what do you do about it? Not even the policeman knows why he has to arrest you. It's because the computer was so clever that it came up with a configuration that it alone knows the reason for. Very, very dangerous. That's the first objection. Yeah? Very unchallengeable measures, and it happens. Don't think it isn't happening. The second one, you can see me putting it in with capital marks. If you try and get very rare instances from a large set of data, you will inevitably get, you can change certain parameters in your analysis. Yeah? This is me looking at statistics. I'm not a statistician, but this is something every lawyer should know. You will either get very high number of false positives, and on the next slide I'll talk about what happens if you do the alternative. High number of false positives means that you get a lot of people who are wrongly identified as belonging to the group that you're looking at. Yeah? It could be a child abuser, or a child not likely to go and eat his vegetables, or a terrorist. Yeah? If you do this for marketing purposes, it doesn't matter very much. If I'm trying to sell lawnmowers, I'm quite happy with getting 15 responses out of 1,000. Yeah? Because that's a pretty decent investment on my return for the mail shop. If I get 15 false alerts in my search for terrorists, I'm going to annoy an awful lot of people. They did some calculation, and they said idiotically high reliability parameters. Yeah? Even at the best possible conceivable scores, like 99.5% certainty and things like that. If you screen a massive population, like everybody travels through the European airport every year, in 1 year period, you're going to get something like 1.5 million false positives. 1.5 million people who you stop, arrest, perhaps shoot dead, like the Menezes in London, because you thought they were a terrorist, and because the computer tells you they were a terrorist. False negatives is if you miss the real culprits, right? In other words, you set your parameters slightly differently, and you get a large number of, you might have 20 real terrorists in your population of 100,000, and you're only going to pick out 10 of them. That is not very good, because you have 10 real terrorists going through the net. The point is that it is an inevitability. There is a mathematical inevitability. I hope, is there anybody here with a mathematical mind? Any statistician or anything? Has anybody ever heard of the base rate fallacy? Put your hand up, please. You have? Good, fantastic. So you know exactly what it means. Well, would you believe it? Most lawyers have never heard of it. Most policymakers who give trillions to companies to develop data mining technologies have never heard of it. Because if you know it, yeah, as a first-year student, you should tell the minister who is about to spend $200 million on a data mining system to catch terrorists that he is throwing his money away. It's literally throwing money away. You can demonstrate it, you can prove it. Yeah? These systems will not work, they cannot work, they mathematically certainly won't work. And the way in which it is best illustrated, there was a very good report on the Surveillance Society in the United Kingdom the year before we did our report on the children's databases, or maybe just half a year before. It had one section on biometrics and the use of statistics in biological and medical research. If you want to screen for particular diseases, yeah, which is a very similar thing to trying to find a terrorist, to find somebody with prostate cancer or breast cancer. Yeah? That is good if you have a fairly narrowly defined target group. So you have women over a certain age have a relatively high tendency to develop breast cancer. So you screen them for breast cancer. Men over a certain age, particular danger for prostate cancer. So you screen them for that. Yeah? If you have a much rarer disease, extremely rare disease, there are always calls from the public, the newspapers, politicians, why don't we screen the population for it? And the answer is, the base rate policy makes it useless. Yeah? The exact same answer should apply to why don't we screen the whole population for terrorists. It won't work. It doesn't work in medical research, which is why they don't use it, and it shouldn't be allowed to be tried in the fight against terrorism, where it won't work either. Mathematical certainty. Okay. How am I doing on time? I always overrun that. Oh, terrible, I've just raced it. There are all inherent biases in technology. For instance, I was talking about face recognition cameras that can recognize your faces. You're walking around on the street. The Americans in the total information awareness nonsense thought they could identify people by satellite who were walking around in the desert. There was also bin Laden walking around somewhere in Kandahar. They could identify him from the air and shoot him like that. Some of these systems have inherent biases. They discovered that face recognition works better with Asian features than with Caucasian features. That has implications. You're more likely to identify certain groups, categories of suspects, then you're more likely to end up with prosecuting them, and you're more likely to end up with that kind of bias in your prison as well. These have really serious implications. Unless politicians are aware of these, they will make the wrong policy decisions. So what's happening? All over Europe, general suspicionless surveillance. All our data and all our faces and all our ID cards are being monitored increasingly and increasingly. Now to Europe. It's being encouraged in the third pillar. You've heard probably of some of this. There are a number of institutions that have been established at the European level in the third pillar. I hope you all know about the third pillar in the European Union.